Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I'm Garbro, the hairy idiot who writes and does all this shit. Welcome back. Thank you for showing back up for the next chapter of the Veil Riders, Section 222. We're going to get right to it, but of course, there's things we gotta do first, which you guys are probably going to skip right on by. But those of you who don't skip by, we're going to talk about our affiliate, and that's Redcon 1, the place you go for all your protein, body, and nutrient needs. Here at Redcon 1, you can get your regular protein powders, your pre-workouts, all the other stuff you may need to go to the gym, but there are things after the gym you must take care of. One of which is your sleep. With a fade-out powder, you can get to sleep faster, sleep more deeply, and sleep more comfortably, as this powder simply knocks your ass out and lets you sleep in the first place. The second is just strange concoction called GI juice that I'm now taking. It's basically it's like a green juice. You got it's full of spirulina, the algae, and alfalfa, along with fruits and vegetables. It is weird, but I do feel kind of better on it, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep taking it. I suppose. The other thing we got to address is that this channel is still not monetized because I'm a big pee-pee poo-poo head in terms of YouTube. So if you do like the stories, you want to see them going in a more expedited pace, I suppose, you can go to the coffee page and donate $1 or $2. And in that way, it helps the channel, helps the VAs, and just helps keep things on track. Discord link down below, comment down below, like and subscribe, and let's get on to Chapter 6, Compounding Secrets. Yule awoke with a lurching start as his mind snapped back into focus, coming away from sleep as if he'd been poked by a cattle prod. He sat up with a wince, looking around and realizing he was sleeping in the little home that Prince Nim had built for him in Tallweed. He rubbed at his eyes with the palms of his hands and looked over at Olivara, who was asleep beside him. Her crimson hair splayed around her head on the pillow like the curling tendrils of a great monster. "How in the hell did I get here?" Yule murmured, blinking his eyes until they came back into focus. He remembered flying over the treetops in the bird after leaving Section 222, but nothing more other than that he had fallen asleep. He felt like he had been run over by a truck that had razor blades for tires. When he looked down at his hands, then his arms, the painful blur of his time at the mercy of Aurora came back to him. Right, he groaned, pulling away the rest of the blankets from his body and jerking down the band of his underwear. He inspected himself visually, and the thin, polite white lines that ran all over his more private pieces of flesh made his stomach curl painfully. "Buddy, what in the hell did she do to you?" Yule said with a pained sigh. Another panic-stricken thought crossed his mind, and he turned towards Olivara. "Hey, honey, wake up." Olivara just groaned and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders.
Yule, how are you even awake?
Yule wasted no further time and with a single hand ripped the blanket off of her, exposing her flesh not only to his eyes, but much to the annoyance of her, to the cold air of the morning that lingered in the room.
What is the matter with you?
Olivara screeched, lurching up to grapple at Yule for control of the blanket, but furrowed her brows at him when he looked straight down at her goose-prickled chest.
Yule, are you serious?
Yule looked up at her deep, dark blood-red eyes, then back down at the part of his body that was reacting eagerly to Olivara, and she looked down at it as well. I was worried it was broken.
You couldn't wait to find out until after I had gotten my last dregs of sleep.
Olivara said grumpily, but she took a small amount of humor and pride that she could get such a rise out of Yule so quickly. Her smirking smile told Yule the same without any need for words. Yule held out his hands. "You wouldn't believe the kind of things they did to me. Plus that Fableman kept cutting it up with their knives. I mean, look how many scar lines are on it," he said, gesturing with both hands at his mildly aroused privates. Olivara rolled her eyes, looked down at where he was gesturing, then quirked the corner of her mouth up into an annoyed line despite the humor in her eyes.
Looks like someone drew on you with white ink.
Yule blew air out through his lips in a raspberry, then looked at Olivara, who locked eyes with him. She shimmied her shoulders, giving her breast a flirtatious sway. Olivara saw Yule mentally restrain his eyes, but knew he saw from how other parts of him reacted. Olivara sighed out playfully, then kicked away the rest of the blanket from her legs, letting the morning sun swim over her skin.
Well, since I'm not getting any more of my well-deserved sleep, do you want to make sure it still works? Or are you satisfied with your current testing methods?
Olivara laughed groggily as Yule pulled her towards him, and the two made sure that both of them were satisfied that the injured party in question did indeed still work perfectly well. In fact, the two of them were so preoccupied that they did not leave Yule's tall wheat home for the entire day. The fright of almost losing the other spurred something within them both, the reality of how close they both were to death's knife edge. Olivara savored Yule, knowing that if she had been any more late, Roira, the Skinner, would have destroyed him down to the last fiber of his being. Yule, despite himself, kept a hand on Olivara in some way through the day, either a finger hooked through her belt loops or resting his hand somewhere on her body like her hip. Yule understood the risk Olivara made coming in with the rescue party, but as Olivara explained to him just who Errol was, his mind was flooding with emotions. To attempt a rescue is one thing. To keep up that rescue, despite knowing what may be waiting for you, shined a new light on Olivara that Yule wanted to further bask in. Correspondence came in a stream to Yule, the messengers either keeping their faces a quiet mask or openly gawking at Yule when a bite mark from Olivara burned brightly on his neck. When Yule ordered food from the quartermaster stores to cook, it arrived with a team of chefs sent off by Nim. Yule attempted to scare them away, but he believed Nim promised something far worse for them if they didn't do their job, as none of them took to flight. He relented after one of the cooks almost burst into tears of frustration, and instead cuddled up with Olivara on a nearby couch to continue reading missives and other reports from his forces abroad. None of the other humans or personnel came to visit him, which he found good and well at the current time. Neither he or Olivara had any plans on getting fully dressed, and only wore what was necessary until dinner was eaten and the cooks had left to report back to Nim. Yule and Olivara were still engaged well into the evening, and both of them only found respite when their bodies finally rediscovered fatigue. Yule breathed in deep through his nose as Olivara slept, her head buried deep into his neck and an arm draped over his chest. His own hand was running its fingers up and down her hip, moonlight peering in through the window and glowing on her skin. He tilted his head and nuzzled his face into her mess of crimson hair, breathing in deep the smell of her and cataloging it to remember the moment. He felt warm and comforted, as if he was wrapped in a giant blanket he could not see. He always felt this way with Olivara, and he could never explain why it was. He savored it now, having known what it felt like to not have this feeling, and let himself become lost in it. Outside the window, the stars shining merrily down upon her, Crinja sat on a roof of a nearby tower, looking down at Yule and Olivara through the window. She herself breathed in through her nose, savoring the edges of cold fall air and her new growing presence on the plain. She smiled happily down at Yule as he fell to the press of sleep, but the smile faltered as she heard someone come down behind her, and she slowly reached down towards her belt.
My.
A husky, friendly female voice said, and Crinja relaxed her hand.
Someone had told me Crinja, the mighty goddess of war and death, had regained her formal presence once again. I didn't believe it, and I had to come all this way just to see it myself.
Good evening, Finitry.
Crinja said, then stretched her legs back out, wiggling her bare feet from side to side.
Hard to believe someone created without a mouth can talk as much as you.
Finitri laughed happily and came down on her rump beside Crinja, nudging her with an elbow as her eyes twinkled.
It's good to have you back, sister. Of course. I knew it was only a matter of time.
I'm sure.
Crinja mused and took Finitri in. Finitri leaned back and kicked out her silk-wrapped feet, smiling with her eyes at Crinja.
Do you like it? One of my favorite highwaymen made it for me. The little rogue.
Just below Finitri's nose, she wore an ornamental mask that covered the empty space where her mouth did not exist. The mask was made of silver, as bright as moonlight, and engraved lovingly with an expert hand. The mask was engraved with the grinning mouth of a lunar vulpine, its long fangs peeking out and framing Finitri's lower jaw attractively. Even a person who was blind would know the mask was stunning after running their hands over it, the workmanship accurate and impeccable. Lunar vulpines were known for the bright freckles that adorned their faces, as they only glowed when the moon was bright in the sky. To mimic this, the engraver had set gleaming white moonstones, sparkling blue ceru stones, and little motes of golden fauni where the freckles would be.
Looks good. Shame the sound still gets out.
Crinja said, but she grinned at Finitri all the same. Finitri laughed, then punched Crinja in the shoulder.
Good to have you back, Angry One. So, the human down below is your new champion?
You could say that.
Crinja said, tilting her head slightly as she watched Yule sleep.
Humans are an odd breed, but they are strong. And this one has anger only matched by mine.
Anger to match yours? Surprised he hasn't popped.
Finitri said, making a popping sound despite her lack of mouth and lips.
What finally brought you back over the line? You've been but a shade far too long, sister.
Crinja sighed out through her nose.
Been gathering strength from the dead humans. Ferrying them to a place where they can rest has been allowing me respite, for once.
And I wonder who taught you how to do that.
Finitri said while tapping her chin with an elegant finger, eyes still smiling teasingly.
Something to do with an old flower?
Crinja barked out a laugh, and this time she punched Finitri in the thigh.
Leave him out of this. But yes.
Wrighton would never approve.
Good thing I don't need Wrighton's approval.
Crinja growled out and gave her hair a shake.
They have strong souls, but they have nowhere to go when they are here. I have created for them a place to rest until I can figure out what to do with them. There is something odd, though.
Finitri scooted across the roof of the tower and bumped her shoulder into Crinja's.
Let me guess. They shouldn't be here? Something with their blood is acting funny with this plane, and you're able to draw power from it and sustain yourself? How close am I?
Crinja slowly turned her head to face Finitri, her eyelids lowered and eyebrows brought together.
You couldn't just let me say it, could you?
Nope.
Right.
Crinja scoffed, reaching up and flicking Finitri on one of her long, elegant ears with a thud of her gloved finger.
But yes, they have been able to sustain me far better than our own usual followers. Yule was able to lay hands on Errol and cause her to bleed. I was able to swipe a little bit of it, and it was the final push I needed to get over the edge.
Finitri reached out and gripped Crinja's cheek with her fingers, eliciting a yowl from the death goddess.
And look how full you are, simply glowing. You are not but a spectral ghost the last I saw of you.
Easy. The last thing I need is you accidentally sending me back to only being able to show up if someone is dying.
Crinja barked, swiping at Finitri's hand as she jerked it back with a giggle.
Melanie's here as well. Well, kind of. She's miles down the road dealing with Brim Touched.
Finitri said, jerking her thumb over her shoulder.
I stopped by to poke fun at her too, and she said to welcome you back for her.
Crinja waggled her hand.
What is the goddess of love and babies doing walking down a supply road in the middle of nowhere? She's usually off glowing over baby showers or ferrying half-breed children to a sparkling life.
I don't know, I didn't ask.
Finitri hummed, then leaned forward, readying herself to stand up.
Now that you're truly amongst us again, what is your plan exactly? Feeling giddy enough to go toe-to-toe with the Fae again?
Crinja rubbed at her eye with a light sigh before turning back to Finitri.
If our plan goes as plotted, I won't ever have to. The Fae have no idea just what the hell they have been messing with.
Our plan?
My elderflower and I.
Finitri stood.
And what do you mean, they have no idea?
Crinja held out her hand and Finitri clasped it in hers, helping the goddess of death to her feet.
We all follow rules set in place by the creators. These humans, they are bound to nothing. They are rogue elements from something else completely. And the moment they set foot on our plane, everything changed. I don't know what it is about them, but they just break everything they get into contact with.
Crinja placed her hands on her hips, looking down at Yule, then traced her gaze to where she knew other humans slept, paced, or bided their time in the night with hobbies.
Oh, how exciting.
Finitri said, then clapped her hands together.
It has been tearfully boring anyway. Now that you're back, the real fun can begin.
Yule snorted awake, jerking his head as a lock of Alivar's hair made its way into his nostril with his breathing. He blinked his eyes and once again sat up, feeling this time far better than he had the night before. With a grumbling yawn, he looked over to the slumbering Olivara beside him, her smile soft and breathing light. He reached over with a hooked finger, pulling tendrils of crimson hair out of her open mouth, then pulled the blankets back up to her shoulders. With a grunt, he swung his legs out and away from the bed, his feet flexing on the cold wooden floorboards below him. He ran his hands down his face with a rasp of skin, then yawned, looking over towards his world-beaten boots. Vacation over. Time to work. Brand new uniforms were waiting for him in the open rack wardrobe, and he pulled one out, looking over it with an approving eye. He noticed that where the ranks would be, center of the left chest pocket, he now had something there, a boldly woven Y with a golden border trimmed around the letter. Yule rolled his eyes but slipped on the fresh uniform undershirt, the uniform, then tied away his old battered boots, tucking the laces in along the tongue to be hidden from view. He thumped down the steps gamely and opened the door to the eager morning sun, looking around to the Veil Rider Fob's progress in tall wheat. Larger barracks buildings were still being built, but the walls had expanded outward in order to give the Huey helicopters more protected space. As he walked down the path towards the main Fob thoroughfare, the area was abuzz with infantry and vehicles traveling back and forth on whatever duties they had that morning. Platoons of troopers marched past, their sergeants calling cadence in their native language while others barked out cadences in English, something Yule couldn't help but smile at. Hearing a dwarf singing about how cold Eskimo pussy was something Yule would have never thought possible in his wildest dreams. Yule was making his way towards the main command building, which was also being expanded since his absence, when he heard an Oni struggling with a cadence in English. Yule hooked a hard right in order to insert himself beside the now wide-eyed sergeant. "Hi-ho, lock and load," Yule barked out, and grinned when every head in the formation twisted to look at him. Some were excited because they had studied a lot of the English language, others horrified because they had no idea in hell what he was saying. Silence crawled on for a dozen steps before Yule rolled his eyes, then playfully shoved the sergeant closer to his formation. Since they weren't heading directly away from where he wanted to go, Yule could stick around for a little longer. "Hi-ho, lock and load," Yule called out again, and this time the formation answered in earnest. Yule played around with the usual words in order to inject some of the native races, such as Onis being butt-ass naked down to their toes, which got a few chuckles from the formation. Yule got through a few of the passages of the cadence before grabbing the sergeant and putting him back where he should be. Sending the formation off, he turned and stepped towards the command building. Yule spotted a male satyr specialist fumbling with packets of reports in his arms, and he squinted, having not noticed this particular flavor of local in his armed forces before. He remembered seeing some of the civilians brought back from the castle mission, but didn't think any had been trained yet. Even more curious was that this one was wearing the harpy uniform bottoms, allowing their furred legs more freedom of movement as well as being able to stay cool in case they got hot. To welcome this particular satyr into the ranks, Yule snatched away their patrol cap without even looking at them, putting it on top of his own patrol cap and continuing on his way. Yule, knowing that humans had written the training program, knew that they followed the same human army shenanigans when a private was found without their patrol cap.
Sir? My cap.
The satyr sputtered, trying to keep the packets together in his arms while running after Yule. Yule turned, glaring down at the satyr, who then skidded to a halt when he recognized the rank on Yule's chest. "Can I help you, specialist?" The satyr gulped and looked up from his hat on top of Yule's own patrol cap to Yule's rank. He had never seen Yule before until now, but had been made aware of what the Y and K ranks meant.
Sir, you took my cap and are wearing it.
"Are you calling me a thief, specialist?" Yule growled, falsely bristling at the comment. This elicited a flight or fight response from the satyr, who stood stock still as sweat began to trickle down his face.
No, of course not. I just think there may be a mistake, is what I meant to say.
Yule leaned in towards the satyr, whose own patrol cap was still sitting cockeyed on top of Yule's. He kept leaning forward until both bills of the patrol caps were pressed against the satyr's forehead. "And just what did you mean to say, specialist?"
That is quite enough, Yule.
Yule stood up straight and looked over his shoulder, the satyr's patrol cap now even more askew, and saw that Romella was standing halfway down on the path to the command building. She raised her brows, hands tucked into her uniform pants pockets.
Satyrs do not like being in conflict, and you might give this one a panic attack if you keep it up.
"Good morning, Rommel," Yule said in a friendly manner, taking off the satyr's cap and fussing with putting it back on their head. The satyr was too afraid to move as Yule brushed stray strands of hair away and into the cap, then decided to torture the specialist a little more, fixing his lapels to make sure they were perfectly flat while plucking at little balls of fluff here and there. "Coming to get me, are you?"
I could sense the panic of the innocent outside. I figured you were up to no good.
Romella said, quirking up her lips into a smirk as Yule continued to fuss with the satyr's uniform.
Appears my senses are still keen after all.
"There you go, specialist. Don't let me catch you without your patrol cap again, you hear? I can't keep giving you mine every time." Yule said with a warm smile, giving the satyr a pat on the shoulder before turning and walking towards Romella. The satyr, face rife with confusion as to just what the hell had happened, slowly turned on his hooves, shaking his head as he went back to his task.
No one is ever gonna believe me.
Always causing a fuss.
Romella said with another shake of the head, but held out her hand to Yule.
Good to have you back, you sadist.
Yule took her hand and gave it a confirming shake. "Sadist? Come on now, Rommel, you know me better." Romella said sarcastically, then jabbed her thumb over her shoulder.
We have a lot of human prisoners cooped up in the command building. We've been working on the contract magic.
"Contract magic? How do you mean?" Yule asked, and kept time with Romella as she walked back towards the command building.
These humans are working on contract, not knowing that it was magically binding. This means they had to sign in blood, which I'm not sure why they agreed to it. Possibly from duress? It bound them in Fae contract magic. A kind of magic even other Fae have problems cracking. A few more of my compatriots have been able to find their way to me. We've been working on it.
Yule stopped walking, and Romella turned to him. He narrowed his eyes at her, tilting his head to the side. "You let more Fae onto my base?"
Fae in your court.
Romella said, tucking her hands back into her pockets.
More of my faction.
"Dracanics?" Yule asked.
Yes, they were marked as human lovers, way before you were even a thought, and made their escape before they could be executed, hiding where they could on Earth till the veil opened.
Romella said, her and Yule staring at each other before he began walking again. I would prefer if you would run this kind of stuff by me, Rommel. Romella snorted.
Not my fault your dumb ass got kidnapped.
Yule didn't have a comeback to that, except a growl in his throat, annoyed, and let Romella lead him to the rear sections of the command building, worming their way past auxiliaries doing their duties. Romella opened a door and Yule stepped through, looking around with curious eyes as she shut the door behind him. A barracks?
Sort of.
Romella answered, then gestured towards the sitting room before them.
It's a magical barrier between us and them, as well as all around this barracks room. Here the Fae cannot contact them and give them order via their contract magic. It also allows us to monitor them and work our way through their ties. There's a few in there that aren't able to shake the binds off.
And sometimes they are.
A Germanic accented voice piped up, and Yule realized that there were two other Fae in the room. Your friends? Yule asked. Romella gestured with a hand towards the two other Fae.
Yule, I would like you to meet Bruder and Aklaman.
The two Fae bowed, but Yule did not bow back, instead looking them over. Both of the Dracanic Fae shared the same facial scale as Romella, and each wore an auxiliary uniform, with their own flair here and there, such as Romella and her scarf. The female Dracanic Fae called Bruda wore a ruff of wolf furs around her neck, the longest part laying down her right shoulder. She had tidy short hair the color of dusk, the color unnatural. Despite the ruffled layers of her hair, Yule could tell it was undercut, and he could only assume she was normally wearing some kind of helmet. Her eyes were the color of the rising sun, the hues blending together as if they were the sky itself. Her features were almost Nordic, perhaps even Icelandic, all wrapped together with pale skin and pointed Fae ears. The male, Aklaman, could not have been more different. His skin was dusky, touched deeply by the sun, and eyes as bright as starlight. His chocolate-hue hair was cut into a high fade, all the way up the back of his skull, and only finger-length near his forehead. His face seemed more Spanish, perhaps even Moorish, and a long sword wound scar ran from his cheek to his chin. Instead of furs on one shoulder, he wore the partial remains of an old dark gray cape, stained by time, blood, and mud. Yule did note, however, that it bore the single large white cross of the Knights Hospitaller. Yule blinked after taking them in, looked to Romella, then passed the transparent barrier into the barracks room. Yule counted roughly 50 humans there, milling about on beds or doing bodyweight exercises in the corner of the room. Quite a few of us in there, Yule murmured. Romella nodded.
These are the ones who survived the contract magic.
Survived? Yule asked, and Aklaman stood.
When they were close to being captured, some of the humans died almost immediately after surrendering, as if someone had cut their strings. Others became sick, passed out, or other such maladies.
Bruda walked up beside Yule, pointing a scarred finger.
These are the survivors. We believe that something about humans has kept them alive, and we were right. After quickly looking at the magic surrounding them, we believe your blood is corrupting it.
You know, all this talk of us corrupting things is starting to put humans in a bad light, Yule muttered. Aklaman laughed, slapping his hand against his thigh.
Ha! More truth than you think. The Queen's plan never even survived contact with the human race. Something was off about you lot. We knew that as soon as we began working on you.
It is as if we were created purely to break the rules. The way your race works almost smacks of defiance, or as some kind of passion project.
Romella said with a soft smile, placing her hands on her hips.
But alright, humans should not exist. You do not fall in line with the rules of the creators. An outlier, or perhaps even a private enterprise. Who is to know? What we do know is that whatever is in your blood has been corrupting and eating through the contract magic.
We didn't even know such a thing was possible,
Bruda said, placing her finger against Yule's temple. Yule jerked angrily, but flicked his eyes towards movement inside the barracks. He could now see the little letters, runes, and pictograms slowly revolving around the humans inside. Some of the runes even looked Sick, if that was a word for it. While other scripts held firm and kept a smooth rotation, others teetered, sagged, or even dropped out of the formation altogether, splashing against the ground like drops of rain. Yule squinted, watching as an entire sentence fell away from a woman who was reading a language book on Tunka, the sentence bouncing off the ground once, twice, then shattering away like ice. What in the goddamn?
Amazing, isn't it?
Bruta said with a flashing smile to Yule, her finger still planted against his temple.
Contract magic can even bind the gods to agreement if they are folly enough to agree to them. The queen herself is bound by a contract or two, and she is powerless to change those terms. And yet, here you little cavemen are. Your very nature eating away at magic far beyond your own understanding.
Aklamon coughed out a laugh, folding his arms as he watched the humans.
Come now, brother. Don't make it sound like they are broken or diseased. This is a fantastic power to have. It may even be the reason why we Draconics have been able to slip away in the ways that we have. For all we know, being so close to the humans caused them to eat away at our bonds.
What's the Crusader talking about? Yule said, pointing a finger at Aklamon, who smiled so hard his eyes crinkled.
Most of our kind keeps their distance from the masses of humanity. We Draconics have been quite the opposite, rubbing shoulders with formations of warriors and scholars for as long as humans themselves could track time.
Romella said, reaching up and jamming her finger against Yule's other temple. As nothing happened, Yule understood she was doing it just to annoy him, and he moved her hand away with the back of his hand. Romella giggled and refolded her arms.
Normally any fae can be traced by the queen, but we Draconics have been able to slip away past her sight.
We believe this to be in part due to how humans interact with contract magic.
Aklamon said, gesturing to himself with a raised hand.
All fae are bound by contract magic to the queen. We cannot even hear her name, only her title, something that still affects us.
Bruta removed her finger from Yule's temple.
She cannot, however, track us, just as Romella said, which has allowed us to hide and escape her wrath. We have been speeding along the process of these humans eating through their contract, by whatever means they are doing so.
You said others died, though, Yule said, watching the woman who was reading her language book.
Yes.
Romella said, pressing her lips together with a sigh.
Roughly 70% of humans that surrendered have died. It appears their contract is fight or die, and it stops their heart once they have stopped fighting.
If we are accepting such a contract, things must be far worse on the other side than I had thought, Yule said as he looked over the surviving humans.
Oh, it gets worse.
Bruta said with a chipper smile, and Romella rolled her eyes.
Even after all these years, your bedside manner is still horrible, Bruder.
Aklamon chuckled.
She is one for hard truth, perhaps too much so.
Bruta rolled her neck around, looking at Romella and Aklamon as they spoke, then looked back to Yule.
The contract has been warping their sides and minds. We believe the greater Fae have been making you and your auxiliaries look quite different in their eyes. I know there's one in there that has been able to see things for what they truly are.
The one learning Tunka, Yule said, pointing to the woman who had paused her reading to drink from a metal cup.
Very astute.
Brutus said, giving Yule a playful punch on the shoulder and continuing on.
She said that when she signed the contract, the Fae's true form was revealed, and we looked like angelic figures. When she crossed the veil, other humans not bound by contracts looked twisted and malformed, like demonic mutants. Auxiliaries looked around the same as far as we can gather.
Aklamon hummed in his throat, shaking his head from side to side.
Such a classic way of doing things. That particular technique was perfected during the fall of Edessia, and it appears that the greater Fae have not forgotten what they have learned.
Are you saying they saw this coming? Yule asked. Romella shrugged.
The Queen is nothing if not pragmatic, and has contingency upon contingency in case things don't go as planned. I would even wager that they will push this method further in order to cement their means.
Yule continued to watch the humans in silence for some time, then turned to Aklamon. What is your stake in this? Why help us?
I owe humans my life.
Aklamon said flatly, shrugging with his hands held open.
I was supposed to be executed, and was only saved by my men and a small gathering of knights from the Teutonic Order. They even knew who and what I was. They saw me as a brother all the same, and bore me away to hiding, allowing me to live through the years in different lives.
And you? Yule said, turning to look at Bruda.
I just think you humans are the cutest little Niski.
Bruda said with a toothy grin, reaching up and pinching Yule's cheeks.
You're going to make him angry doing that.
Romella said with a snort, watching Yule slowly lean further and further away from her pinching fingers.
Also, don't call them that. They're nothing like the goblins out making a mess of this place.
Goblins are still running around?
Aklamon asked with raised brows.
I thought they would have been exterminated by now.
Romella wrinkled her nose.
The Ouroboros knew what he was doing when he made the things. Those little cretins will outlive us all more than likely.
Was the first sign of the Queen's desperation, having him create those monsters. They did their job, but not well, and made a mess of things.
Aklamon murmured, disgust rife in his bright eyes. Yule, still fending off Bruda and almost putting her in a headlock, pointed eastward. We fragged an entire cave of those things a long time ago. You're telling me they were designed to hoard the flesh of the living?
You don't want to know what else they do, let alone how they breed.
Aklamon said with a grimace. Romella held up her hand.
I would like to eat later. Let's not get into that.
Yule went to ask just what was so gross about the reproduction process, but recoiled in disgust as Bruda stuck out her tongue and licked him from elbow to wrist. Ugh! You licked me?
Bruda, ladies and gentlemen.
Romella said with a weak showman's gesture. Bruda chortled and sputtered some of Yule's arm hair from her mouth.
Anyway, these humans will be staying here until they naturally eat through their contracts. If we let them out too early, we run into the risk of being confused by their warped sight and possibly killing us all.
I would like to talk to that woman, Yule said flatly, pointing to the one that went back to reading her book.
She may try to kill you,
Aklamon said, and half smiled in a confused manner when Yule gave a short laugh. Yeah, and who ain't nowadays? Yule said, turning to Romella. Think you can pull her out and into a room so we can speak? Romella nodded.
We can manage that.
Afterwards, Bruda led Yule to a small room that held a table, a few chairs, and a high slitted window for airflow. Bruda held her arms out near her sides and drew in a deep breath, exhaling out through her mouth as she closed her eyes. Yule figured she was casting the same magic that was on the barracks room that held the humans, but this one smelled different, and the scents began to build as Bruda sang softly. This spell smelled of pine needles, juniper, sea spray, and leather. As Bruda continued to weave her spell around the room, Yule's ears twitched to the subtle noises that murmured under Bruda's voice, but he could not pick up any of them, except for the quiet rushing of wind through trees. When Bruda was finished and Yule finally popped his ears from the pressure in the room, Romella led in the woman who had been reading the language book in Tunka. The woman bristled visibly when she saw Yule sitting in a chair across the table. Aklamon followed in after and shut the door behind him.
Tom Yule, as I live and breathe.
She hissed out in hushed English, but Yule said nothing as he studied her. She was ex-military, or at least militarily inclined. Her body was athletic, toned, average height, and devoid of scarring except for her hands. Her dusky brown hair was tightly wrapped up into a low bun, while down the sides of her face she allowed foxtails to dangle down past her jawline. Her eyes, Yule noted, were green, but he could see small flecks of silver glittering within them, something that could never have happened naturally. You have silver in your eyes, Yule said in English after a few moments' pause, in which the three Fae in the room turned and looked into the woman's eyes, looks of surprise on their faces.
What?
She said, the statement catching her off guard. Yule looked to Romella, who just pursed her lips and shrugged. What's your name? Yule said next, and gestured towards a chair across from him on the other side of the table. She didn't move and stood where she was.
You're acting awfully cordial for a man who butchered an entire platoon of peacekeepers then tried to become a warlord. Do you have any idea what you did?
I don't. Why don't you tell me? Yule said, his face aggressively passive and hands still gesturing towards the free chair. She glared at Yule, but slowly walked towards the seat, pulling it out and sitting down. They stared at each other in angry silence for a stretch before she finally broke to silence.
How did you get the three of them on your side?
Yule raised his eyebrows. Get them on my side? That one there came and stuck her foot into my life without me having to ask, he said, pointing to Ramella, who squinted her eyes at him. The woman continued on as if she didn't care for Yule's answer.
You killed those fucking peacekeepers and the lid blew off the top of everything. You know that?
The lid of what? And you have yet to tell me your name. Yule answered, waiting patiently. She angled her head down slightly, glaring hotly at Yule as her lips worked with her thoughts. After a moment, she finally answered.
Olivia.
Good to meet you, Olivia, Yule said, then gestured with his hand for her to continue. You were saying something about a lid. Olivia did not change her mask of hatred as she responded to Yule.
We were everywhere and everything. We thought the veil was just a doorway and the whole world was clamoring for a taste after you went through. While you were gone, there was an impeachment and an election, and the new president quickly fell into league with the UN. We were surprised, but what she said made sense.
She? Yule asked, raising his eyebrows.
Alexandra Mabe. We had our first female president, a new world on the cusp of exploration, peaceful cooperation with the UN for the first time in decades. We all felt like we were being ushered into a new age.
Olivia said, and her voice buckled near the end, and Yule could tell there was actual emotion attached to the sentiment.
Then you had to go and butcher the team that went through to bring you back.
Yule had an urge to argue his case as Olivia was not there, but he felt it would have been a waste of breath and energy. What happened after the team was killed?
You don't deny it.
Olivia said with a brisk tone of accusation in her voice. I don't. I killed those men because I thought it was the right thing to do, Yule stated matter-of-factly, and he saw Aklaman nodding his head from where he stood. Olivia swallowed, but went on.
The leader of that team was the son of someone on the higher end of the UN Council. And that's when we all learned the truth. You had killed Some Fae's half-bred son, and it enraged him so greatly that he threw off the facade and torched your birth city.
What do you mean, torched? Yule asked, suddenly alarmed.
Shawnee is gone, Yule,
Olivia said, and leaned towards him to add more emphasis to her words.
Gone. The entire city is nothing but ash, twisted steel, and empty roads now. 30,000 people were turned to dust because you had to plug Some Fae's son.
Yule was unsure how to react to this, as while he was born there, he lived elsewhere before he had left. On the other hand, he had grown up in Shawnee and knew a lot of people there from his youth. He worked his jaw slowly, looking over to Ramella before flicking his eyes to Olivia. Then what?
Then, they all came out at once. They were everywhere, Yule. They controlled everything. From the military to the government, power, water, food. They had control over it all.
Olivia said. You didn't fight back? Yule asked.
Of course we fought back, are you mad?
Olivia growled, gesturing with her hands in an aggressive manner.
Earth burned for almost 6 months. Even when I signed the contract, there were still militias running around attacking Fae-held compounds. Russia led the way first, then other countries rallied behind them where they could. But we had no idea what we were up against, Yule.
They used their magic, didn't they? Yule asked. Brutus spoke up from beside Ramella.
The greater Fae were unleashed, yes. From what I hear, you fought a fire spirit amongst other things. But the older greater Fae can do things of horrors beyond mentioning. Their tasking depleted them by some amounts, but the favored results came through. Akraman and I were able to sneak through when you untethered the veil, but it is harder now that they try and contain it.
Olivia pulled out her battered, slowly dying cell phone and pulled up a map from her picture files.
When we fought back, entire countries were scoured. Look!
She gestured towards her phone and Yule leaned in to look at it while she talked.
Half of Russia is now just tundra and glass. Some fucking spell was cast and the jungles of South America tore apart half the countries there. Billions died, Yule. Billions.
They cowed you into submission then. They had to thin the herd as we outnumbered them, showed the cattle who was in charge and what happens when you step out of line, Yule stated, and Olivia nodded her head while inhaling.
Those who fought against them and caught were assigned brutal contracts, then sent over in the first waves. There is now just one government, the Second Court as they call it, and they have an iron grasp on everything. Those who volunteer to work are granted more food and power, while those who resist are almost living completely off the land and off-grid.
What about you? Yule asked.
What about me?
Olivia spat back and Yule leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Why are you here, bound by contract? Olivia swallowed again, glared at Yule, then looked away towards the floor.
I was tired of being hungry and saw what was coming. You step out of line and these motherfuckers,
Olivia said, pointing furiously at the three Dracanics,
come out of nowhere and blast you, or tear you out of the sky, or punch a hole in your boat for daring to fish or hunt, or have any semblance of self. I had an option of starving to death with my family, or taking a contract so we could all be fed. So I took the contract and signed my life to the Second Court.
Yule leaned back into his chair and looked over towards Ramilla, who shrugged.
Not all Dracanics are like us, Yule. Just as not all humans are Veil Riders.
Fair enough, Yule said, then looked back to Olivia. You said our people are still fighting. Olivia nodded.
The war hasn't ended, not by a long shot, but we're also not winning by any degree. We hide underground, or in the mountains, launching attacks on supply trains, convoys, anything we can to survive. There are a few Fae on our side, but it is a pinch in comparison to the Cup.
How do you get back over the veil? Yule asked.
We don't.
Olivia replied, and she tilted her head back, swallowing again.
Once you're over, you're over. The Veil is fighting back as hard as we are, it seems like. Whole regiments of contract soldiers wait for when they stabilize it and rush over only for it to break loose again. You should see what happens when people get caught in it after it gets free of the Fae that run the machines.
Do you know what their goal is? Yule asked as he crossed his arms, and Olivia shrugged.
Control? Why settle for one world when you can have two? It was funny. They acted like they were refugees at first, tried to garner a positive spin on what they were doing, but it didn't work out in their favor like they thought it would. They tried all kinds of angles to get us to cooperate, but they settled with the fist rather than the hand.
How much do they control? Yule asked.
All of Europe, most of America, all of Canada, and most of the southern region here. The southern elves are all in with the Fae, and they are working on getting the Alberdon Valley elves in on it.
We are aware of Radigan and what his ilk are up to, Yule said, tapping the side of his boot against the nearby leg of the table. What I am curious about is you. I can't do anything about what is going on the other side of the veil, and to be frank, all I can do is handle what is going on here at the current moment. You said there's no way for you to get back, or any of you?
Not unless one of the Fae allow you to go back over. Usually as a reward for killing your men.
Olivia murmured, and Yule felt something stir in his chest. So what are you going to do after your contract is broken? Yule asked. Olivia blinked a few times, looking from Yule to the Dracanics in the room.
What do you mean? It's only a matter of time before I die. I saw the others.
Not from what Rommel says, Yule said, nodding towards Ramella. Ramella nodded her head in agreement.
The others died, yes, but you and the others are slowly destroying their contracts.
Something about you and humans like you weakens the contract, allowing you to live. We wager you'll be free from it before the month is out.
Brutus said in agreement.
We showed it to Jewel via our shared site.
You're surrounded by letters, but you're making them sick, Must be your personality, Yule said with a friendly grin. Olivia blinked at Ramella, then turned her head a little towards Yule.
What is to become of me?
Whatever you will of yourself. If you want to fight, I will arm you. If you want to live, I will settle you down in our stronghold lands that have a second chance at life, Yule said, shrugging his shoulders.
Just like that.
Olivia asked curiously, snapping her fingers quietly. Yule nodded, just like that.
But I killed your soldiers?
Olivia said, shaking her head from side to side.
How on earth can you just let me go?
Olivia, I've been blown up, brought back to life. And not just a few days ago, I had a fey woman cut into my nutsack for several hours. She buried a knife into my heart so many times I still get phantom pains. Yule said with a wry laugh, and Ramella snorted as well. Shit happens. You didn't join to try and kill me or my men. You just joined to get out of a bad situation. Olivia opened her mouth a bit, closed it, then opened it again.
They really missed the mark on the propaganda when it comes to you.
Yule grunted. Don't discount it yet. So, Olivia leaned her head back, crossing her arms as she looked up towards the ceiling. She thought about it for a moment, then leaned her head back down to look at Yule.
Do you need English teachers?
Yule chuckled, then stood up from his chair. Learn Tunka first, and after that, you'll be in more work than you can handle.
There are more of us coming.
Olivia said abruptly, and Yule turned to look at her.
Whole divisions are waiting to come over. They have us by the balls, Yule, but even then, I know that if we do what they want us to do, they'll get rid of us, like a dog scratching off fleas.
Olivia's face fell as she looked down to the top of the table, and Yule watched her for a moment before looking over to Ramella, who looked back with worried eyebrows. Yule said nothing in response, tucked his chair back under the table, and made his way out of the room. And that's the end of chapter 6. A little tidy, short chapter, help plug in a few of the, what's going on elsewhere during Section 222's adventures. Now, if you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe and click the bell icon to the channel of Guardbro's Field Desk. That way, everything works as YouTube says it should work. Now, if you really enjoy this story and want to help out this unmonetized trash story channel, be sure to go to the coffee link down below and donate $1 or $2 just to help keep things swinging through the trees like the little monkeys we are. Discord link down below. Comment down below. Tell us what you think about the story, the characters, the voice actors, whatever have you. A big thank you to our voice actors, as well as our guest VAs, the VTubers Likely and Wishy, as well as our new VA Danger, as well as Fire Aristic Rider Dusty Parch. You know how it works. You know the game. Look at these people over here. Look at them. Look at them go. Everywhere. Look at them go. Anyway. Until we see you next time on this side of the veil, this is Guardbro, my VA team, and this is Guardbro's Field Desk.